What up, everyone? Today is not going to be a vlog. It's going to be a instructional on how to replace the stator on your Husqvarna FC450. I'd assume it's the same for all the FC models or all of their 450 models similar to the KTM 450. I noticed there is no videos on how to remove and replace the stator for the Husky, so I'm making one. The reason why I am making one and putting one on my bike in the first place because I've got the FC450 Rockstar Edition. I just ordered all new plastics, all new graphics, and on top of that I got a rigid front headlight. The amber lens comes off, but this will be going there. And I got graphics for that too. In order to run a headlight with this bike, because there's no electronics on this bike, no headlight or blinkers or any type of lights, the stator doesn't put out enough electricity to keep the battery charged. So people are having problems with their battery dying when they put a headlight on this bike. So I got the Trailtech stator. It's for KTM 250, 350, 450, and for the Husky 250, 350, 450. It's a high output. I think it's 60 or 80 volts or watts or whatever. Putting this bad boy in today. Take off all this shit and get in there. I already started before I decided to make this video. So the first step, you're gonna want to take off your seat. This bike, you have to take off this side panel to unscrew a bolt right here and then slide the seat back, lift it up. I also took off the skid plate underneath, and I'm about to take off the shifter. I'm also going to disconnect the battery. We'll go from there. Got the battery undone. Tuck the wires. This one's got rubber around it, so it's not going to touch the battery, but I'm going to tuck it anyways. Tuck the wires so they're not accidentally touch the battery. I traced the cable up, and this is the ends. It's these two yellow wires and this wire. You're gonna need to cut the zip ties, and I'm assuming there's probably another zip tie in here, and you're gonna need to route it, the new one, in. So next step, you're gonna want to remove the gas tank. So in order to remove the gas tank, I'm going to remove these bolts on both sides, take off the shrouds, these bolts right here, and then unbolt the gas tank. And on this bike, it has a quick release for the fuel right here. So you don't have like an on off, boom, undo the fuel, and then take the tank off. These bolts right here are 5mm, so I'm using a 5mm. Now that all the bolts are off, front and top, you're gonna take this plastic and just slide it back, and it's off. This one's a little trickier because this side had this side piece off. So I'm just gonna pull this out. That way I can slide it off. And then what I like to do is I take all the bolts and I just thread them back into where they belong. You don't gotta do it a lot, just finger tight. That way you don't lose them during the process. Because if you set them down, you might kick them or something always happens and end up losing them. So just gonna throw them back in, do the same for the front, and then we'll get the tank off. Just a little something I like to do when I'm working on my bike and I'm taking parts off is, you could see when you wash your bike, there's always shit underneath. I like to wipe everything down. That way when I put it back together, or while I have stuff exposed, there's not dirt and stuff falling in it. So I'm just gonna wipe that down real quick. And before my next ride, I definitely need to clean my air filter because that thing's nasty. All right, so everything's all wiped down nice and clean. Next step, you wanna undo the bolt that's right here in the middle. You already got your gas line disconnected. If you don't, do it now. And then the wiring for the fuel pump, just undo that clip, and that's it. I'm gonna pull the breather tube out. And now that everything's undone, you just pull this bad boy up. Get a fish to line up. And here we have the gas tank, and it's full. And now I'm just gonna wipe all this stuff down before we head to the next step. But now you can see all these wires are exposed, easy to get to, easy to route the new one back up into here. So it'll be a lot easier putting everything back together. Now that I have tank off, everything's clean, I'm gonna go ahead and cut the zip ties holding these wires together. I'm gonna disconnect these. I don't think I can do it with one hand. Okay, disconnected these and run this cable down through here. And of course, the new one is going to be routed up through here the same exact way, and then re-zip tied to ensure the cables don't move around. Gotta undo this little wire clip right here, pull that shit out, and boom. Now the wire is free, unplugged, good to go. Now for this next step, you either want to drain the oil in your bike, because we're taking this cover off, which will have all the oil be leaking out. So you could either drain the oil in your bike, or what I'm gonna do, because I don't feel like draining the oil, is I'm gonna lay the bike on its side, and then we will get to the next step. Got the bike laying on its side. Next, we are going to take off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of these bolts surrounding the stator cover. Just gonna loosen them first. And then now I'm gonna take them all the way off. And then once you get them all the way off, you want to be very careful taking the cover off, because you'll rip the gasket. And if you're like me, you didn't buy an extra gasket because you didn't think about it. So I'm going to try to reuse the gasket, but if I screw it up, then obviously I'm going to have to order one and leave my bike on its side and my McLaren out in the driveway for a few days till it gets here. I got all the bolts out and I put them in a box so I don't lose them. It's a very solid gasket, so I don't have to replace it because I didn't screw it up. So when you're pulling this off, it's really hard because of the magnetic energy. It's a magnet stuck on there, so it feels really hard pulling it off. Once it's like past the metal, it's good to go. So now that I have this completely off, set it here. I'm gonna take these 3 bolts that are holding the stator down, and then these 2 bolts holding this piece on, take it off. I'm gonna take the gasket off first, and then after that, we'll get all that stuff off and put the new one in. And that's good to go. Set that there. Clean this off with a rag. Have to clean up the whole edge of this before we put the gasket back on, obviously, and clean the gasket up. So now I'm going to find the right size Allen wrench for these, take these off, and we'll get to the next step. Okay, so the Allen wrench you're going to need is a 4mm for these. Get that out the way. Loosen them all up first. These are really on there. It's like a really tight thread. One bolt, 2 bolts, 3. So these are shorter for the top 2. Okay, now that those are off, I want to make sure that you remember how all this is situated. So this comes off first, and then this is just sitting here with the wires at the top. So you want to make sure you're not installing it upside down. And have it like this, wires at the top, straight down, and shimmy this piece out. And then pay attention to, so where is it at? Right here is where it was at. I'm going to pay attention to where the wires were. So the wires are off to the left hand side. You kind of see this right here, the little groove in the case is where the wire coming from the side is gonna follow this little groove up. So just like that. I'm gonna clean this off and we'll be right back. The box came with some 3 new bolts to mount the stator. And it says use these included bolts to mount the stator to the engine cases. Do not use the stock mounting bolts as the wide flange can contact the stator windings and short the stator out. Failure to use these included bolts can cause permanent damage to the stator and loss of electrical output. However, when I compare the stock bolts to their bolts, let me take it out the bag real quick because it'll be easier to show you guys. Here's their bolts, right? Here's the stock bolt. The stock bolt has a lower profile head, as you can see. When you compare how wide it is, it's the same width. So I'm gonna use the stock bolts because it's got a lower profile and these are taller. I don't want it touching something shorting out like they say the stock bolts will. Maybe since my bike's a little bit newer, they got rid of that problem and went with a lower profile bolt. I'm not sure, but I'm definitely using the stock bolts. Yeah, that's not gonna touch. So what I'm doing right now is I'm comparing stock bolts to the bolts they gave by putting them in the holes. That's that. It's kind of pretty close to the coil. And see this green rubber that's going around? There's green rubber in between the bolt and the coil on both of these holes, but not on this one. I take a little bit of gasket maker or something and just put a little bead across right there between where the coil is and the bolt, just to give it a little added protection. I guess I could use these bolts. I'm just kind of skeptical on these, but I mean, because they're taller. Doesn't make any sense. They're just as wide, but taller than the stock bolt. Like literally just as wide. I don't know what to do. If you look, they're literally just as wide as the stock bolt, but taller, like I said. This one's a very short gap. I might try to push that bottom coil up with some pliers or something, just a little bit, and then put a little bit of like either silicone or gasket sealer or gasket maker right here. Just because, I mean, look at the stock one. Like, it's got a rubber seal around the whole thing. And for some reason, this one, during manufacturing, doesn't have that right there. So, I'm gonna figure it out, and I'll get back to you guys. Alright, so after digging around my garage for a while, I do not have any gasket maker, and I know I bought a tube, but it's just, I don't know where I put it. I had it with me when we were dirt biking and my little brother broke his wrist. So I'm gonna have to say screw it and install it how it came, and hopefully the bolt isn't too close to the coil. I mean, as long as it's not touching, then it should be fine, but I mean, electricity travels. We'll see. Hopefully I don't have a full system failure when I start my bike up. Anyways, I'm gonna start putting this back together. Let's get to it. Also, I don't know if you guys are this type of person, but I am. I'm gonna put just a tiny drop of thread lock on the bolts, because the last thing you want is these bolts backing out while you're riding. I'm gonna put just a tiny little drop on the end of the threads. Oh, and I am using the bolts that they gave me with the kit. That way, if anything goes wrong, it's not my fault. I used their bolts, did what they told me, and that's that, you know? So make sure when you put the bolts in that you want to tighten them down to where it's barely just snug on all three, and then you want to take turns, tighten this one and this and this, and just go around. So make sure when you're tightening them that you check your manual for the torque specifications, and you want to torque them to the desired torque setting in the manual. Otherwise, if you over tighten them, you could always end up snapping the bolt, which is never fun, especially inside of the engine parts. If you under tighten them, obviously you know what happens then. So I'm gonna get these tightened up and then we'll get to the next step. Got everything in there, everything's torqued down. Got the wires up top right here. Got this rubber block nice and in the groove right there. Got the wire that's down in the groove right there. You wanna make sure when you're looking at this, here's the top, here's the bottom, that you put the stator in with where the wires come out of it to the left and at the bottom. Once again, you run that wire along that groove, and then when you put this back in, there's two wires coming out of it. They're at the top right here on the back side. You want to have them towards the top. You don't want to have this upside down. So this is exactly how you're supposed to have it. Everything's in, good to go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean around here. I'm going to clean the gasket right here, put it back together, and we'll get going on that. I'm not worried about the gasket. I'm gonna buy a new one because I actually am gonna have to do this all over again because I ordered a carbon fiber cover, so I'm literally gonna have to do this whole process over again. I didn't even think about it till literally right now. I was like, oh great, I should have just waited like a week until my parts came in and done this video, but oh well, practice makes perfect. Oh, look at that, see? I missed something. Look at that, huh? So I'm gonna take that back off, put this in. So this is not what it's supposed to look like. This is supposed to go in there. Back to it. All right, so now, this is what it's supposed to look like. All right, everything's good to go. Everything's tightened down. Now I'm gonna clean around the surface, make sure I have a nice seal for my gasket. I'm gonna clean the gasket off, and then I will be back. But this is what it's supposed to look like with that little plate right there. Okay, I'll be back. This is nice and clean. I cleaned the gasket, and now I need to clean around here on the case. Make sure, because there's some oil from when I pulled it off. Little bits of black from the gasket. Little bits of oil when I pulled it. Now, grab the gasket. So make sure you put it on the pins. There's a pin here, and there's a pin here. Now, carefully, try to keep this perfectly lined up. Oh, remember I told you about the magnetic force? Pretty much pulls it on there for you, so there's that. Now we're gonna put the bolts on and torque them to specification. Make sure you check your manuals for each individual bike, and I'll be back. I got all the bolts on, everything's good to go, and now that the case cover is on, as you can see here, everything's torqued down, good to go. You can stand your bike back up, which I'm gonna do, put it back on the stand, and I'll be back. Got the wire back in this loop right here, put it up behind here, so I had to, instead of like going over the top of the throttle body and then going up, I had to like literally take a shortcut and go straight through here, the shortest route possible, because this wire is a little bit shorter than stock and it wasn't allowing me to have enough room to plug everything in. It's all plugged in. This is plugged in nice and snug. These two yellow plugs are nice and plugged in as well. Now I'm just going to zip tie all the wires in place like they were before, and then we will get to putting the tank back on, shrouds back on, reconnect the battery, and then we'll do a test, fire this thing up for a test, make sure it's all good to go. I got everything zip tied down nice and pretty. I wrapped the two yellow wires with electrical tape just because the plastic sleeves had a tiny gap of where the metal was showing, and they're so close together I didn't want them accidentally touching while I'm riding, so just did that. Looks tacky, but it'll be safe. Now I'm gonna put the tank on, bolt that down, connect the pump, and then connect the fuel, and then put the shrouds on, and I'll be back. So I got the tank on, bolted it down, plugged in the pump, and you have to make sure you route the gas line up and over the throttle body, down along behind the frame, down to here, and reconnect it obviously. But that's all done. So now I'm gonna take off all the bolts that I placed back and put the shrouds back on, and then it'll be done. It's pretty simple job. Just gotta make sure you do it right. So hopefully this helps you guys out. But let's get this finished up, buttoned up, and started up. Shrouds back on. Only thing I don't have is the seat, just in case some type of issue. Only issue I can see is the two yellow wires, because they're both the same, and I don't know if one's supposed to be connected to the other or not. I took my air filter off because I'm cleaning it. Everything's buttoned up, got everything put on except for the seat. I'm leaving the seat off just in case there's any problems. The only problem I could imagine is the two yellow wires, because I don't know if it matters if one's connected to the other or not. There's no markings or anything, so it is what it is. See. Yeah. Well, everything seems good to go. Get the seat back on and it's finished up. Then it's time to put the headlight on. But that'll be a different video. Take it easy. Hope you enjoyed. Make sure you like, subscribe, and comment. Peace.